All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Watch This with Rick Ramos. As always, it's your host, Rick Ramos. As always, my co-host and producing partner, Mr. Ibrahim Chavez. We're coming to you this this Thursday morning. We're excited to be moving forward in our examination of the horror genre as we go into October, closing in on Halloween. I know it's still only September, but there's a lot to dig into. Admittedly, horror. I've stated in the past that horror is not necessarily a genre that I've really endeared myself to, and I think part of the problem is that so much of horror. I mean, every genre has good and bad in it. The problem with horror is horror tends to be something that is a lot of times cheap and sometimes gratuitous and a certain level of amateurish production. So that becomes problematic for people who love movies. I mean, those who love horror really dig into it, jump into it, they discover that world, they find these great directors who have directed horror masterpieces. And yet, for a lot of the others, there's a certain level of prejudice that goes into any movie watching experience, and with that prejudice comes an attitude of dismissal. So I'm guilty of that, and I know a lot of other people are guilty of that. What's great about this show, and what's great about this yearly genre dive that we do, is that it helps us discover films that we might not have looked at, films that we have either avoided or have that have simply slipped under our radar. I don't think anything is more blatantly invisible in cinematic genre than the black experience on film. Well, you could say that about just about any ethnic minority, but what little bit you're going to find is usually black cinema, and we simply don't know the names and the faces that have made this subgenre of a bigger genre famous. So, this week, Mr. Chavez and I are looking at a documentary on the Shudder television network. It's called Horror Noire: The History of Black. What is it called? Shudder Horror Noir:
Horror Noire, a history of black horror.
A
And
History of Black
so
Horror.
it's
Yeah.
horror, and then noir is spelled Noire.
Hmm.
So it's in the feminine
Yeah.
instead of Noir to distinguish between the genre of film noir and noir as in black in French.
Hmm. Well, this is a very basic talking head documentary, but these are the kind of documentaries that I love. I love these kinds of. I mean, I definitely love in depth the Earl Morris, the those types of documentaries, the Art of Killing, the Herzog documentaries, but documentaries that go into the history and a lot of times the sociology and politics of films and filmmaking really grab a hold of me. And this one was a lot of fun to watch. This one was a lot of there were a lot of really interesting ideas here. A lot of recommendations for films that I might not have ever heard of, some that I knew of and just avoided because they seemed silly. I'm talking about films like Blackula, Scream, Blackula, Scream. I was very dismissive of that whole idea because I thought it was a silly title. I thought it was a kind of opportunistic changing of the Dracula name because it could easily fit in there, and I thought it was funny. But to hear Ken Foray, Keith David, Rusty Cundiff, and Ernest Dickerson, all actors, writers, directors that I admire, and I've appreciated their work. That's the kind of thing that opens a door to you and allows you a window into something that you're not familiar with, and it opens up the possibilities of new movie watching experiences. So that to me is the ultimate entryway into something that you might not have known and the purpose for doing it. This is a documentary on the Shudder network, but it's airing for free right now, ad free on YouTube. So you can just punch it in, find it, and it's a hell of a watch. It's a good time. How did you first hear about this film?
There's a book. So Dr. Robin R. Means Coleman has a book called Horror Noir.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I knew about the book. I haven't read the book, but I knew about it, and then somehow I discovered that there's a documentary based on the book. So I said, okay, well, that'll work. That'll work too. You know,
No, it fits into the month. It fits into the idea of what we're doing,
absolutely.
and yeah, we
And
haven't.
it fits into
Hmm.
it's something that we would do
Hmm.
in terms of like we've done these episodic things with the Oscars, with the history of television, with uh, the films of the decades,
Yeah.
whether they're like year-long projects or we explored a little bit of rock and roll, um, and we'll continue to do so outside of that kind of
Hmm.
format. Um, so it's kind of it it's up our alley type of thing, you know.
Oh, it's definitely up our alley. Yeah.
So I and um, I liked that it was broken down in a way that allowed you to see the development because it is over. Excuse me, it is over time.
So you're talking about the
So
early days of
it
cinema.
starts
Yeah.
off with early cinema,
Hmm.
and it starts off. There's a UCLA professor that it features, Tenerife Dew. She's like, we've always loved horror, but horror hasn't always loved us. And if you didn't already fucking know, like, you know what you're in store for at this point
Oh yeah.
because we know the tropes. And then they go into the tropes. Um, and so, of course, the beginning of the earliest high point, which is like the high point of cinema, one of, a low point in history, I guess, at least from this side of the aisle, um, is Birth of a Nation.
Yeah. A film that we've talked about many times. It has come up in many episodes. It's impossible to ignore. It's impossible to ignore on the technical merit, but it's also impossible to ignore on the social and political merit that of what it the template that it set up for race relations, for the fostering of ignorance and racism, hatred. I can see it's a pretty obvious beginning for this documentary in which where you start playing with the image with the ideas of horror. What is horror to one people might not be horror to somebody else. It's very strange that a
Especially if
film
it's normalized.
yeah, and that's the main, which makes it even more horrific to those people who are targeted. So when you I think when you and I talked about the birth of a nation, I had talked to you about this film. It's I know I didn't introduce you to it, but I gave you I definitely introduced my perspective on it, my history on it. I had never seen the entire film until we sat down to watch it for this for an episode. Well, actually, for the films that defined the early 1900s, because that film was either 1917 or 1919. So we're talking about the Nickelodeon films. We're talking about the Great Train Robbery. We're talking about the Gangs of Pig Alley. All of those films before even the silent era, before the Buster Keaton, before the Fatty Arbuckles, Chaplin, before that period in which films began to take shape. Birth of a Nation was the film that led that onslaught, and in doing so, there were a lot of casualties. So you and I talked about this, and I remember telling you about how ridiculous I thought some of the film was, and it had me, because I have a really warped sixth sense of humor, so I laugh at shit that I find very disturbing, because it's like we talked about last week, and it's like what we talked about with Young Frankenstein. Horror and humor live right next door to each other, and in some ways there were times when I would laugh at the sheer balls and audacity of the imagery that I was seeing on the screen. But as I watched that film and I saw the Ku Klux Klan, normalized and elevated to the level of hero worship, the film began to really disturb me. And I think after watching that, I started looking at other images. Primarily at that time, it was the new Rambo film, Rambo Last Blood. And I was disturbed by what I was seeing in a way that I would not have been disturbed by had I not seen Birth of a Nation. So you start picking up on the vocabulary of cinema, and you start picking up, even when you think you know, even when you think you know as much as you're going to be able to know, other things begin to rear their ugly head and impact you in a different way, and you understand the true power of cinema. Birth of a Nation really showed me the power of what the image was, and I could only imagine what it must have been like in the late 1910s to see a film like this, to be white seeing a film like that, and to be black seeing a film like that, because, as I've said a number of times in the past, I sit outside of all of that. Being Mexican American, you look at it and that factors in as well. You look at things from a much different vantage point, a much different view. And there's like in watching this documentary, I look at it with a different view. I look at it where I'm hearing black directors, writers, actors, and scholars pointing out the imagery, the lack of imagery, as well as the negative imagery of blacks in film. And there's a part of me that feels like, well, I don't see anything that represents me on film. Almost, there's a handful. So that's another argument, but it is there. And the reason that I bring it out is because I want people to understand the luggage that, and I've said it in the past, the luggage that you bring into a film really affects the way you watch it, and you can still be open-minded about it, but there's no way that you can ignore how you receive something.
Yeah, we're all bringing our own skeletons to the horror.
Yeah, we are.
And also to acknowledge that at the extremes, you're gonna have people that are like, okay, like you're not white, but you will never understand the depths of blah blah from the black experience because you might as well be white because you're not black.
Yeah, there is that.
And then on the other side, there's gonna be like, well, look, okay, you're saying you stand outside of that because you're not black, but you might as well be black because you're not white.
Yeah.
So fuck off. You know what I mean?
This speaks to you as well. When it doesn't. Not in the same way. It's different. It's different.
It's always nuanced, and at some point, it goes to the. You were talking about the Elvis Mitchell documentary. What is it called? Black Enough for You? What is it called?
Yeah, I think it's called Black Enough for You. It's on Netflix. It's a very good documentary. Very, Very well done. And Mitchell
So
is a very conscientious and sensitive filmmaker. So I went into it with that attitude.
in these conversations, there's always going to be that fucking, not to use a racial image, but like Goldilocks type of thing where it's whether it's this documentary, whether is it too much or not enough. That's going to be the thing with horror. It's like, is it gratuitous or is it representational? Is it, you know what I mean? And there's always going to be that. A lot of people experience, on one hand, being themselves considered too much of something but not enough of something else.
Yeah.
And so getting back to this, we see the beginnings of, particularly in Birth of a Nation, we see the beginnings of the trope of black lust for white women. And so there's a scene that we talked about in Birth of a Nation where there's a black character who's chasing a white woman. And so at that point, you know, the I don't know if it's the same scholar or not, but she says, you know, black history is black horror. For black people watching Birth of a Nation and others watching Birth of a Nation, because remember, and I'm number one guilty of this, because of maybe generationally or whatever, those of us of a certain age, of a certain Gen X sensibility, blah, 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 we tend to think that, or pride ourselves or whatever in, oh, I've seen it all, I can't be shocked.
Yeah.
You know, the whole, like, Gen Xers are very proud of the fact that we used to drink from the water hose and we were always outside and our parents were whatever, right? We weren't coddled and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we're getting older, so we're starting to look at, and, you know, there's a danger in saying, oh, well, these fucking kids nowadays, you know?
Yeah.
You've seen it all until you've seen some shit that makes you go like, fuck. You can still maybe laugh because you have a horrible sense of humor. We have a horrible, whatever,
Yeah.
all of us collectively, whatever. But we also know that, like, god damn.
Yeah.
And so you can say that Birth of a Nation is, you're watching the horrors of racism. But then racists are also looking at that movie and they're seeing that chase scene, and to them that's horror because the monster is after the pristine white damsel. And they see a truth in that horror. You know, it's for example, look at the QAnon, like the horrors of the pizza parlor child trafficking thing that everyone who we don't like is involved in somehow. That's, you know, they see that movie with Jim Caviezel that endorsed by Mel Gibson and endorsed by you know, the right wing, like, all stars.
Yeah.
And they're like, fuck, you guys don't know what's happening. There's a, you know, an invasion of the child snatchers, you know? So it sets up the whole thing. And we talked about that too. Birth of a Nation, you can watch Birth of a Nation and you can see parallels to what's happening right now. And parallel tropes, parallel attitudes. And that this goes all the way into that whole, like, there's early on in that era, blackface. You can go into King Kong. You know, that's a pretty clear example. The idea of African Americans not represented other than as being tribesmen. So that means, i.e., savages. Um, and it even brings up like the Amos and Andy Spencer Williams, like the Son of Ngagi movie, which I didn't know about.
I didn't know about either. Yeah, I knew about
So I'm
Oscar
curious.
Michaud, but I didn't know about Spencer Williams. I didn't. That came as a complete shock to me. So that's one of the fascinating takes that you know whatever you think you know about movies, there's always another layer there. There's always a little bit deeper. There's a different story that hasn't been told that either has been swept under the rug or has been ignored completely and just never came out. So to know that Spencer Williams, one of the team that portrayed Amos and Andy, which originally on radio were two white men. So that's a whole other aspect to it. To think that this was a man who was bug-eyed, shucking and jiving on TV in order to, I would suspect, raise the money necessary to shoot these films, doing what we would consider a Cassavetes move. But maybe Cassavetes got it from Spencer Williams. I don't know. I found it shocking. I found it shocking, but I also found it very inspiring. Because let's face it, you and I work shit jobs that we fall into, that we do, and there's the idea. However strong or weak it is in the back of our heads, this is it. This is all that we're ever going to be able to do. But when you hear about something like that, you do get the inspiration to say, get up and start putting together something that you actually care about, which you could argue we do with this podcast each and every week. But that was a moment that was a real light bulb moment where I was like, wow, shit, there's sacrifices. If a sacrifice is going to be made, there needs to be, you need to be sacrificing for something that's worth taking from. It's not just keeping the rent paid, keeping the lights on. There's got to be a little bit more. That was powerful for me when I saw that. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you see this man.
BuyMeACoffee.com.
Yeah, buy me a
Just kidding.
coffee. Watch RickRamos. So you see this, and even within that framework, you had Spencer Williams challenging certain societal tropes because, at least from the clip that we saw, it was a black woman scientist who was making the groundbreaking discoveries that that would lead to some kind of breakthrough for humanity. Now, who knows what happened in the film? I'm suspecting that it goes sideways. It's a woman who has trained an ape man or something that is half man, half ape. It's a sequel to a movie called Ngagi that was directed by a white director, and it was incredibly racist in just the description of tribes people, African tribesmen who had mated with some kind of monkey. That's the impression that I got. Is that what you got?
I mean, I don't think there's another.
Yeah, there's not.
I mean, some kind of
right?
primate. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like we could split hairs on it and say, well, did the thing that they made would have a tail or not? Is it really a monkey?
not a lemur.
It's not racist.
So
it's not a monkey. It's an ape. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
it's like that's basically what it is.
Yeah.
And kind of the transition, the way they use it is it leads into the next chapter basically, which they don't break down necessarily the chapters like really like in a sharp way. It just kind of, you just keep moving through it, but you move in beyond early Hollywood into kind of post-war, well, atomic age / post-war, and with the exception of this female scientist, black female scientist from this film that we're talking about, you move into a period where you see basically no black representation.
Well, in the film, the talking heads, the actors, the scholars, they argue that all of those alien imagery, the visitors from space, these invaders
but
from
that's
Mars.
Metaphorical.
Yeah, that's metaphorical.
Yeah,
and you know what? I don't buy that, and I've never bought that. I don't. I think that's a stretch. I can see why you can make that fit. You can make that piece fit in the puzzle. I don't think so.
I buy it.
To some degree, for some films, maybe, but
you would have to be completely. You would have to be a completely literal-minded person in order to say that there's nothing there.
Because no. I'm not saying there's nothing there, but to say that every film,
it's either a stretch or it's not.
No, that's not true. That's not true. It's with some. I think the reality of the world is that we are viewed as we are viewed as the unknown and invaders, and
we as who?
We as ethnic minorities, we as non-white people, as they like to call us, people of color today, a term that I fucking hate with a passion. People of color, they want to say that. I think there's a degree of that, but I don't think, when I watch either John Carpenter's Thing or the Howard Hawks produced Thing from Another Planet, I don't see that as an invasion of migrants coming or illegals coming across a border or Sudanese refugees. Yes, there is a parallel there, but I think there's still something palpable about the threat of an extraterrestrial being, which is much different from, I think they're grabbing.
Well,
for me, it's even worse because it's just a complete denial that we exist. It's just and that was filmed from probably the mid 40s until probably the early 60s. Yeah. Where it's just like, if you were ethnic, you were a servant of some sort. You did not exist.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
They basically put it in context of the atomic age and the sci-fi and in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no blacks in the lab, basically.
Yeah.
So then the way that it's presented in the film is it's not like a blanket. At least I didn't take it to be a blanket saying like, okay, so now every villain or every creature or every whatever in horror now becomes. They're not saying necessarily that. I think they're saying that there are, like you said, there are parallels.
Yeah.
And that's one reading that you can take of it, is that there is this fear of the other.
Yeah.
So if you have a creature from some other planet, that is a fear of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a fear of the other that's out there, but then you also have the fear of the other that's over here, some of that representation and some of those meanings are going to get transferred onto, the ghetto is another galaxy, right?
Yeah.
And we don't want that coming here. So the creature from the Black Lagoon becomes, it's below the surface. It might be the black creature from the lagoon. That's what I think they're saying. So that's why I argue with you on that point of that it's a stretch, because I'm like, I don't think it's a stretch. And now it's also, we can be guilty of reading things that immigration and all this other stuff into into older movies or older types of media because of our experience now.
Yeah.
We can do that, and we do that.
Sure.
We as people in general. So there may not have been the same numbers of like immigrants coming in at that point or whatever, but it's like fear of the other can also just mean communism. It doesn't have to necessarily mean something racial. But all of those others are in the other under the other umbrella.
But I got the impression from the documentary that was what they were saying, that it was that all, you know, they showed clips from Invasion of the Body Snatchers. They showed clips from this and that, and they were citing, rightfully so, the lack of black representation in these films as any kind of a scientific mind or some kind of a hero. That's why Dwayne Jones in Night of the Living Dead is such a powerful. I mean, it's a great performance, but it's even more powerful because there's nothing else like it. There is nobody else like it. I'm sure that there were plenty of black actors that could have brought what he did to that within the world of acting. I'm not saying that anybody, it is exceptional what he did, but it was just like you'd never seen anything before it. You rarely saw anything after it. Even now, it's like, I mean, how often have you seen a black man in a movie just smacking the shit out of a white man? It's a very rare thing, and when it does happen, it's very self-conscious. You see it where, I mean, I feel bad. I sometimes feel bad even saying it because it feels like I'm pointing out something that white people can do no right. Where it's just like if I see, it's almost like black imagery in film. When something like that happens, I feel like it's a Tarantino kind of obvious ploy to win over an audience. Where it's like you definitely get the sense that Tarantino has this mindset where this is just me and maybe you. I don't know. We've agreed on certain aspects of Tarantino in the past, but I definitely take from Tarantino someone who's, yes, I might be white, but I'm still the baddest black motherfucker out there. That's what I get from him. And so those kinds of, like, I remember when I went to see Forrest Gump, and you saw Bubba's mom serving a white family. Do you remember that? She was a maid.
I don't remember that scene.
Okay, well,
I don't remember.
He's talking about his mama, and they cut to a scene where she's dressed. She's dressed Aunt Jemima like. I might be misremembering that, but that's what I remember. And then later on, when Forrest makes millions in the shrimping industry, he gives half of the money to Bubba's mom, and Bubba's mom is now dolled up in what looks like the same dining room, but now she has a white woman maid serving her. And I remember the crowd erupting, and even then I thought to myself, that's fucking pandering. That's pandering. And I also felt like all of these white people are just kind of patting themselves on the back, making themselves feel
the ones who are
that.
depicting that. You're saying the white people that are patting themselves are who?
The white people writing and directing, so that falls on Zemeckis, but also the white people that were laughing and clapping in the theater. It's a kind of a sense of well, it's fictional anyway, so I can embrace this. That's just that might just be my prejudices. I don't know. I think there's
I'm going to ask you.
It. Yeah,
I'm going to ask you because I feel like a lot of times you take these extreme
Oh yeah,
all or
I
nothing
have a lot of
kind of
issues with race,
takes.
and it usually
But
goes
not
to
only that,
extremes
I mean in
sometimes.
general.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we saw it even with like the rock and roll stuff. It was like, oh, that's white shit. Or with some of the TV stuff, it's like, oh, that's white shit. And
Well,
it's like,
yeah,
okay,
but white shit, I can embrace certain white. I'll call it white shit, but like I've told you in the past, you know, 30 years ago, you wouldn't catch me listening to Elton John. Now I listen to him all the time. I dig him. But that doesn't mean that it's not white shit. Billy Joel's white shit. I like Billy Joel. But then you look at the Ramones. That's white. I love the Ramones. So it doesn't stop me from liking shit, but yeah, there's a level of prejudice that is
some
there
some
that I
people would
don't.
say that's Jewish shit, so it's not white. But
Well,
you know,
that's another argument
if
for another time as
if
well.
we're
But
dealing with horror, if we're dealing with horror noir,
yeah,
okay. But
go
now
ahead.
you made me fucking forget my question.
It had to do with the
Nice
extremes of
move.
my. It had to
Um,
do with the extremes of my racial politics. I think.
no, this is my question.
Okay.
When you see, and I don't want to go, this applies to what we're talking about, and you've moved us into the 60s now.
Yeah.
So, um, when you see that scene in Forrest Gump where now that character, the mother, the black mother who was a maid, now has
A white maid.
a white maid,
Yeah.
obviously you can say that that represents wrongs being righted
Yeah.
and just a role reversal and justice, whatever you social justice, whatever moral justice, however you want to describe it,
Yeah.
or just the time, because what time period is this when in the film when it happens? What decade does that
Well,
happen in?
he meets Bubba in Vietnam, which was like 67, I think, because then they're they're in the occupied. So we're talking about the 70s into the early 80s, I think. Yeah. So where he starts
Well,
making the
let's say
money,
it's the
late 70s,
70s.
early 80s. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the idea of like the world, we turn the world upside down.
Yeah.
Um, we've overthrown all of these things, and now the last shall be first.
Yeah.
Um, so can't you conceive that that's just a representation of that versus like, oh, here, let me write this scene so I can feel good about myself, or let me write this scene so I can get people, liberals, to cheer, or I can get black people to like really feel something in this moment. Um, why can't it just be a representation of all of what I described, or
It's
just an ironic like
well,
flipping of it?
I think it can't be because of the the obviousness of it, the blatant. I look at a scene like that, and you know it's difficult to talk about this because you haven't seen it, or you don't recall it.
I don't
It's
recall it. I've seen the
yeah,
film,
you've seen the film, but you don't recall this moment in the film. But it obviously had a.
but it's so
It's
obvious that it doesn't take it. If it's so obvious, it doesn't take like me watching it to understand the concept.
you don't, yeah. But me bringing it up says something about the hang up that I have over it. I mean, admittedly, it just might be my prejudices and my misgivings about this type of thing. But I think I'm right in this respect. I see the point that you're trying to make, but the execution leads me to believe the execution leads me to believe that it's not commenting on the time. It's going for a joke, and it's going for a very obvious joke in that respect. So, what's the because then it insinuates certain things where it creates this image of she was a black maid, so you know she was probably mistreated or she was probably just yas yasa yasam. There was a lot of
Right, of
that.
course.
So when then they flip it and it's her, what kind of hell is she putting this white woman through? And are people laughing at that because it's well deserved? I I just look at that and I'm just like, that's so fucking obvious. It's
So what
I
would
find
have
shit
not
like
been
that
obvious?
to not
Like I'm
include it
gonna
at
dig
all.
into. We're gonna spend the whole hour on this. So what?
Okay.
Why? What would have been not
I
obvious
would not
then?
have
To have
included
should she
that
have been
scene.
Mexican?
No, no, no. I wouldn't have included. I wouldn't have drawn that parallel in the first place. I would have alluded to the fact that she was done that, and then maybe just show her on her in her own home. But it was a joke. It was going for a joke. It was an obvious thing, and it was. It's just. It's pandering. It's just fucking bad writing and bad execution, but it also stems from what I view as a white liberal mentality that is supposed to make up for certain things by a scene like that, and that part. So obvious filmmaking is the problem that I have
So
because I find it
this
insulting.
this all is applying into what we're going to talk about right now
Yeah,
because we're going to go into Romero with the casting of
Dwayne Jones
Quinn Jones.
or Ken Foray.
Um, okay, what if it had been a black director and it would have been the same thing? What if it would have been Spike Lee doing it? And I know, like, I don't know what you're gonna
I
say,
would
but
be disappointed with Spike Lee
but
going
look,
for such low hanging fruit.
here's the thing though,
Unless it was a
is it just by the virtue of the fact that it's a black director already means it's going to have a lot of different cultural meanings,
sure,
especially if it's certain directors that are going to use those in
yeah.
a more meaningful way. If it's a different director, it's not going to come from the same place because it's not going to be a white liberal pandering, blah blah. And I know we're arguing something hypothetical.
But we're also arguing
But if it's
something,
this,
the execution of humor. And humor is a very delicate it's probably the most difficult thing to get across in a film because number one, humor is subjective. Number two, humor is it's easier to go for a blatant laugh than to go for something that is a little more substantive. I find that a film that has more, I mean, you're gonna watch something like you take two funny films. You take Airplane, and you take
Mhm.
let's say let's say you take Airplane,
Mhm.
big, obvious, throwing shit at a wall and seeing what sticks kind of humor. There's even a moment where they throw shit at a fan. It's fucking ridiculous. There's a moment where the plane is going crazy. Everybody's they're choking each other, they're fighting. The camera is set up looking just down the aisle, and then some chick with giant naked tits, runs in front of the camera, shakes her tits, and then runs off. It's fucking hilarious. It's ridiculous. But then you have a more subtle comedy, something that makes me laugh, like Midnight Run. Um, the laughs aren't this is a joke. The laughs are come more from human character. What Zucker Abrams Zucker do in Airplane, to me, it's a lot easier than what George Gallo did in Midnight Run, because Midnight Run comes from a more real human. The laughs stem from the discomfort between two differing attitudes, two differing individuals, two guys, oil and water. It's the old Odd Couple. It's Neil Simon. Neil Simon is a good example. The Odd Couple works because of you can relate to Felix, you can relate to Oscar. They're both real. Now, when you there's a subtlety in the humor. With Forrest Gump, you're going out of your way to create this world, and I just think it's an obvious, cheap joke that, for me, is insulting. not because of what it is. It's insulting because it's so obvious. But that's my
So
take
it's
on
not what it
humor.
is, but it's how it's done.
It's how it's done. I don't have
All
a
right.
problem with I don't have a problem with the scene so much as I have a problem with the execution, because it's like, here I'm going to give you something obvious to laugh at. No, you earn the laugh. And
I
I just remember an audience being like laughing, and I'm thinking to myself, you motherfuckers wouldn't laugh if this were real in your world. If this shit
mm,
changed
interesting.
in your home, you would not find this shit funny.
Yes, and that's horror for them.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's the problem that I had with that moment.
um, I just like to press you on these on your views and on your statements.
Well, yeah,
Not
I'll
because
go.
I don't think you have
Yeah,
not because I don't think you have anything to back it up. I just want to
yeah, you poked a bear.
I want to, and it's not poking the bear. I think it's just like I want to see like you examine your own shit.
Oh yeah.
Um, I mean, and me myself as well.
Hmm.
Um, so okay, so all this being said, talking about white director, black moments, blah
Hmm.
blah blah. Now we're going into from 1915 or whatever, which is Birth of a Nation, till 1968.
Yeah.
This is where we're at. Like it's taking this long, and now this is what's cool about this documentary and this subject is that like maybe there's someone listening at home that's like, you're not even talking about horror anymore.
No.
Um, and it's like, well, we're not, but we are, um, because this is just a microcosm
Hmm.
of like you described it earlier, a subgenre of a subgenre. It's like this is just one aspect of cinema,
Hmm.
which is all of cinema. Um, so it takes this long during the civil rights era, where you have assassinations, you have the Watts riots and
Yeah.
other riots. Um, you have Night of the Living Dead, and you have people in the documentary describing, because it's mostly in the documentary, it's directors, actors who are in the films. They're
Well,
sitting in a theater.
yeah. Well, there's
Um,
Todd Barry, Candyman. There's Ken Foray, Dawn of the Dead. There's Keith David, The Thing, They Live. There's Paula Jai Walker from Tales from the Hood. Rachel True from The Craft. There's a Miguel Nunez from Return of the Living Dead. There's a they got together a large number of horror film alumni, and it's interesting because
yeah,
each one of them has a different. They don't have a different take. They have a very similar take from different experiences. Like Keith
at different
David's,
eras.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Like Keith David. Keith David is not the first to die in either.
we'll we'll get to that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, that's part of the trope. So there's, and I'm not saying that the trope doesn't exist. I'm not saying that the magical black man doesn't exist, or the mammy character, or the first to die. None of that. All that shit exists. It's out there. Someone like Keith David is the outlier. So you have somebody who
yeah. The
is
exception
the
proves the
exception.
rule.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, what you have Dwayne Johnson. Like there were films here. I know
Dwayne
Night of
Jones.
Dwayne Jones. I'm sorry, Dwayne Jones. I know Night of the Living Dead. I love Night of the Living Dead. I know Ganja and Hess, but I've never seen it. I want to see it now. And I know Spike Lee did a remake of it called "In the Blood of Jesus," I think, where it's a weird kind of take on. It was that period where, well, Spike Lee isn't really making studio films anymore. He's a lot of his shit is independent, low budget kind of sideline shit. So he made a remake of Ganja and Hess. I want to see Ganja and Hess, then I want to see Spike Lee's film. I want to
Yeah,
see Blackula. I want to see Scream Blackula scream. I want to, but then also, you also have this idea that it's like, because it's the ghetto of films, and I'm saying that shit intentionally. Let's,
Yeah.
black horror is the ghetto of horror films. So, however low budget your average horror film is, your black horror film is doing it on even less than that.
Yeah.
So you get a film like Blackenstein or Doctor Black and Mr. Hyde or whatever the fuck that was,
Let's
where they
let's
admit horrible. Yeah.
hang on to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're still in the 60s.
Yeah.
So Night of the Living Dead, Keith David, going back to him, he describes Dwayne Jones's character in Night of the Living Dead. He says it was the first black character who was really a man.
Yeah.
Like, digest that. You know what I mean? Like, everyone else up to that point, in the eyes of Keith David, is like, this is not the depiction of a man.
Well, let's be honest. Everything before that had been Mantan Moreland or Stephen Fetchit or this bug-eyed, oh, I got to go, I got to move. That kind of shit. The shuffling, the lazy. They were
Sure.
stereotypical,
We know.
very negative, images.
To include the creature from the Black Lagoon, whether you agree that it's that or not. You get what I'm saying? So,
Absolutely, I get it. But then you have a Dwayne Jones who is a man, and they don't go into his backstory. They don't go into who he is, but it's all there because in that moment he's taking charge. He's there to make sure that he lives, and as many of the other people that at least go along with him. And it's it's very pronounced and very the clip that they use. You can be the boss downstairs. I'm the boss up here.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's stating matter of factly, this isn't going to be whatever the fuck you were used to. Not even what you think it's going to be. What the fuck you used to. I am not.
And it's it's a direct also flipping. It's kind of mirrors with the Forrest Gump thing because it's like you usually think of the servants or the lower classes or any kind of way they're below.
Mm-hmm.
They're the underdogs. They're the underground. They're the whatever, and it's the higher level, the penthouse level, there's the subterranean, there's us, Jordan Peele, the underworld, versus the people on top in the overworld. This time he flips it. He's like, you may be in charge down there, but I'm in charge up here.
Yeah.
That's also a reversal. And it is a version of what we're talking about, what we were arguing about with the Forrest Gump thing. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, now I'm the boss. Mm-hmm. And this definitely isn't going for a laugh. This definitely isn't going for any of that, what you were talking about.
Yeah. But think about it. This is something that takes over the film. This is a vastly different execution. It's a vastly different style of presenting what you say is a parallel, at least theme or parallel kind of situation. Dwayne Jones isn't taking any shit because Dwayne Jones knows what needs to be done in order to survive this thing, or at least is willing to take on that mantle and say, I'm going to get us out of here. And he virtually does. He it's not a shocking ending the way it plays out. The ending plays out the way it should play out. Anybody who thinks otherwise is a fucking fool. I understand the need for a happy ending. I understand the need for hope. But especially in a film like this and commenting on society the way it is, I can't think of a grander statement from anybody than to have Dwayne Jones killed by. You don't know that they're racist, but you know that those are fucking racist
I
cops.
mean,
No, it's like I was telling a friend of mine this. I was like,
yeah, you
I
haven't
don't,
seen the racist
yeah,
membership card,
yeah.
but
I don't know
go
Foghorn
come on.
Leghorn is racist, but I know that fucking rooster is racist. You know what I mean? There's just something about it that is just
I mean,
fucking
it's
ridiculous. It's fucking
you know,
ridiculous.
it's
Yeah.
not something about it. It
It
is.
is. It
Um,
is. I said. You know what I mean? Just hearing
well,
I
it's
said, and you see that sheriff could have been in Mississippi Burning. I could see that motherfucker in Mississippi Burning.
of course.
Yeah.
Um, the 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 ending is what David Mamet describes as. He says the ending should be this way, shocking but inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I don't always agree with him. Fuck him. But whatever.
Muddy's a good writer. He's got a
Yeah,
good flow.
of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, like none other. But okay, so then, yeah, they describe striking white people and seeing that and being like, "What the fuck? He's killing these white zombies."
That's
And
a
when he's
racist
killed by
nightmare. Yeah. He said that. She said that's a racist nightmare.
yeah, and so you have these search parties, which are basically like can be seen as these white mobs, lynch mobs. He's the only survivor, and they see movement in the house, and they just matter of factly, it's ambiguous as to whether they. It's not explicit whether they're like, okay, we're gonna kill that such and such, or if it's just movement, shoot the movement. Okay, we have another one. Then they talk about George Romero driving to New York with the film cans in his trunk and hearing over the radio that MLK had been shot, killed. And what must that have felt like to know that you have that ending, you have that character, which they talk about how Dwayne Jones just happened to be the best actor to play that part. And so he got the job. So he's the guy. Yeah. But what that must have felt like. And that gets us into the 70s. But there was a little moment, and I don't want to spend because we have to move, but when Keith David talks about this was the first black character who was really a man. Yeah. There was a part of me that I was like, it made me think about Dave Chappelle and his transphobic whatever. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about, I wondered about, he's been critical of African American men in roles, in drag type of roles. Yeah. And how the system, Hollywood, whatever, at some point will demand that you put a dress on. And that is a show of, it's an emasculating move, and that it's a show of buffoonery, and that it in and of itself is a racist concept, or racist practice.
I'm conflicted with that.
Well, regardless of what we actually individually think about it, which is obviously we think what we think about it. Whether but I wonder if on some level there's a connection between that and his stance on the trans issue, or the trans issues, because maybe he sees this, especially within the black community, he sees it as a form of
emasculation,
buffoonery, emasculation,
mm-hmm.
a form of whatever, and it's like, no, like, you know, we're men thing.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly to how maybe some feminists see male to female transsexuality as this is just another area where men are now breaching, crossing another boundary, and invading a female space. It just made me think of that, and it's something to chew on.
I think both sides of that argument have validity.
Like Charlottesville, it's like I see people on both sides.
Well, maybe
and Trump.
I hate to agree with the bastard, but on this one, I have to say that they're like with
on who?
So if you
Chappelle?
No, you said Trump. I hate to agree with that cocksucker, okay. But you know, an idiot can say something that leans into the truth occasionally. Personally, I think that Dave Chappelle is right when he talks about the emasculation of black men on film dressed up as women. But I also go back to a long tradition of comedy in that a man dressed as a woman is a funny thing. And every comic I can think of, every film comic that I can think of has done it. Fatty Arbuckle, Chaplin, Keaton, the Marx Brothers, the Stooges, Monty Python. Once again, it's the freedom that white actors and performers have to do without having this label put on them. The problem isn't necessarily black men dressed in drag. The problem is that these are the only images that are, the few images that are available inevitably steer into that direction. And then it becomes problematic for somebody to I mean, let's face it. You and I have talked about it in the past. We've talked about it on this show. White people are afraid of black male sexuality, and they're very fascinated and they're fascinated by black male sexuality, but they're also very fascinated by black females. So it's both.
Yeah, there's
arguments
a lot there.
Have a lot. Yeah.
I mean, there's also the aspect of like, there's, going back to the dawn of time, the trickster, which the comedian comes from the trickster, the jester, that person overturns all order, overturns all sense of like what the culture holds dear. That person pokes their finger at it. Yeah. And the trickster is a shapeshifter, and the shapeshifter is trans.
Yeah.
Because that's what it means. The shapeshifter can cross over between this and that. The shapeshifter lives at the crossroads.
Yeah.
The trickster, that's Prometheus. That's the person that enlightens us. That's the person that tunes our guitar when we want to fucking make that deal.
Yeah.
So it's fucked up to say, okay, well, we have this practice that emasculates a certain group.
Yeah.
But it's just as fucked up to only view any form of that as emasculating, and sure. In that sense, it's kind of like you're creating the segregation where it's like you're reinforcing the fact that only white people can do it, because you're saying when blacks do it, it's bad.
Yeah.
Versus having a way for someone like a Prince to go beyond and say, not only in terms of in the business and fighting the record companies and all this and that, but now to just say like, nope, this is my symbol. I'm beyond this concept. Well, figure me out now.
Yeah. Yeah.
where it's like, no, Chappelle, Prince is transcending your nonsense.
I don't know that it's nonsense. I don't know that it's nonsense. It's a perceptive.
Maybe the content is not nonsense. Maybe I'm talking about the style. Maybe I'm talking about the delivery. What you were talking about with Forrest Gump. Maybe at that point, maybe I think he's going for the joke clearly,
well, yeah,
or the non-joke, or whatever.
He's
Or
definitely digging deeper into something with That's the problem with jokes, though. It's that there's humor and then there's social commentary, and sometimes
yeah,
they're not the same thing. Sometimes they don't fit together that well. That's why social commentary humor is the hardest humor to do, because it's weightier. There's more at stake. There's a greater chance of offending somebody, and you know there's always been offense, but I don't think being offended has been embraced the way it is today. And I even worry about saying that, because that dates me and shows me to be a certain level of dinosaur that I don't necessarily want to take up a certain mantle. But
sure.
you can't help feeling the way you feel about certain things. So I support them in certain ways, but I also think it's a much deeper, there's a lot of fucking layers to that onion, man. And you start peeling and you just discover that it's more and more and
Yeah,
more. And so, like, when we talk about horror noir, I mean, I'm obviously going to come at this with a very different interpretation and impression of black images on film. Ken Foray, Keith David, Todd Barry, the men and women that make up the talking heads of this film are all more valid than anything that I have to say. But it doesn't mean that what I have to say is readily dismissible, because it's not in keeping with them. It's not. I remember being in an African American literary class. We were talking about. No, we were focused on Toni Morrison, and we were talking about The Bluest Eye. And I hated the book. I thought it was really. I did not like the book. I just thought it was. I
what book
loved
is this?
The Bluest Eye. It was her first
Okay,
book. Now, Song of Solomon, Beloved, those are great. Those are
beloved.
masterpieces. I love those books. But I distinctly got the feeling, and was told later by a few people, that I have to like it. And that's where. So if you disagree with somebody about something from an artistic perspective, I understand the fact that I might not that I definitely don't relate to it like a black person would. And then
Yeah, and
there
maybe,
are
and
subtle
it's fair to say maybe you
nuances.
don't understand it, not because of
Yes.
that, but it may be that it's
Well,
like,
there's certain nuances that I don't.
yeah.
Denzel Washington was talking about making fences, and
Oh, I've seen, yeah.
you've seen that,
Mhm.
and he
We
says
already
something
talked about it.
very. Yeah, he was like, Martin Scorsese could have shot Schindler's List. He probably could have done a good job, and Steven Spielberg could have probably done Goodfellas. But we're talking about cultures. We're talking about cultural understanding, and he said everyone here. It was a black interviewer. It was his entire cast. Everybody here knows what it smells like for a hot comb to warm up on a Sunday morning. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah,
The
some people are
smell,
going to have to
but I
start
know, but I know
Googling,
what it is. I
like,
know what it is. You know what I mean?
right.
I've talked to enough black people. I've read enough black literature. But regardless of what I know from my experience talking and interacting with people, I have no idea what that smell is like.
Right, you can
So you know,
imagine the
yeah,
smell, but you can't remember the smell.
yeah. It doesn't hit
Um,
me. But at the same time, it was like college when I realized I think it was like my second month of college when I realized, fuck, this is the longest I've ever gone without eating beans. Now that might sound ridiculous. That's a ridiculous statement. But if I go to my mom's house right now, there's a pot of beans in the refrigerator.
Yeah.
They're going to eat it at some point this week. They're going to have it for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. We're going to have beans at some point.
Or all.
Or all. Or yeah, definitely. There were those days. There were those days.
I mean, yeah.
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 And these are cultural things. Yeah.
Yes. And smell
Mm-hmm.
is so tied to memory.
Yeah.
Um,
Cooking.
Yeah.
Being out there with my grandmother as she flipped tortillas on in the old-fashioned way with those big ones, those fucking, they look like goddamn
Flour or
blankets.
corn?
Flour. She always did flour, but she would flip them, and I could see her fingertips burning, and you just. But I remember, and
See, that's very specific too.
Yeah.
Flour or corn?
Flour or corn, yeah. I don't even
and
know
you-
if
and
she
the
could have made
smells are
corn.
different.
Yeah, I don't even know if she could have made corn. I know she made flour, and they were very different from my other grandmother who used cornstarch or whatever. So it was I mean, there was these are the things. So when you watch a black film, and especially like a black horror film, black horror carries with it all of this imagery, all of this experience, all of these reflections of stories from your parents. You have a certain level of police authority in these films that most black people can relate to. From I don't know any black people that haven't been fucked with by the police. Everyone that I talk to seems to say, "Yeah, I've had that happen. That has happened."
Yeah.
I haven't been fucked with the police as much.
But even that, it's like
even
as
that.
much.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's a spectrum.
Mhm.
It's like it's you didn't say I haven't been fucked with by the police.
Mm-hmm.
You said as much.
As much, but I also, but then again, black people.
Those of
don't-
us who haven't been killed
Mhm.
haven't been fucked with
Yeah,
as much.
as much, and it's not the same thing. But black people don't know what it's like to have somebody come up to them and automatically speak Spanish, which is something you and I have discussed, and pisses me off to no end.
Explain.
Unless they're Mexican, I do not like
Oh, I see what you
anybody
mean.
coming up to me and speaking Spanish. I fucking
Wait,
hate
but
that
well,
shit.
hold on. I'm being picky right now.
Mhm.
So if it's someone from Nicaragua, who
You know what?
comes up to you and says,
Okay, that's me falling into that trope
Clarify,
of
please.
everybody south
Clarify.
of the border. I just say Mexican. Okay, so any Spanish speaking person who comes up to me and speaks Spanish, I don't have a problem with, and I will try to speak Spanish with them. You've heard my Spanish; it will make your fucking ears bleed, but I will try. But if some white person or some black person or somebody else comes up to me and automatically starts speaking Spanish, I get pissed, and I do not hide it.
That's interesting.
Because to come up to me and speak Spanish, and maybe I'm projecting, I probably am projecting, I know the image that you have of somebody who doesn't speak English. And it's not a scholar from another country. It's
Right.
a peasant.
Yeah, of
It's
course.
somebody who is uneducated. That shit
Yeah, it's
I
not
will
someone
not
who's
accept.
probably bilingual or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's also it's going to be tied to place
Mhm.
because when Leslie and I were in Italy, we were like, all right, we're gonna practice our Italian. We're gonna like use it like as much as we can.
Yeah.
And so we're in Rome and we're at this place that has different bars or whatever at the station. This market, like central market type thing. And we get to the counter, first counter, and my mouth is opening to greet this person, but the person beats me to the punch, and the person was like, "Hola." So the person and Leslie and I laughed because this person is like, I get to use my Spanish
Yeah.
today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because Spanish and Italian are sibling languages, you can get by
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not. Um, so it was like, ah, fuck, like they they pinned us quick, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and it wasn't on that trip, but it was a different trip, and this wasn't language, but this goes back to, this is all tied to the same thing. We were at the airport in Paris, and it was early, and the French person at the gate was very rude to us
Mm-hmm.
and very dismissive. And then we were like, well, we're just looking for our flight. And we pulled out the blue passports, the American passport.
Yeah.
And then his whole demeanor changed. And after I was telling Leslie, I was like, I think he thought we were gypsies in the beginning, because especially traveling with Leslie, like, it's possible to think that.
Yeah.
And it's just the way we were dressed and kind of like whatever. But it is very much like, at that point we could have been, it's the invisible Negro
Mm-hmm.
trope. You're gonna fall into these tropes. You're gonna get cast as the servant, regardless of whether, and obviously, depending on where you are, it is what it is. Because different people fill that role in different societies. But those tropes of a sacrificial Negro,
Yeah.
the invisible Negro, the servant, the funny one, and I think we're gonna have to split this episode in two, because we're just going to, it's too much, and
If you
I
want
want
to,
to
we
do
can
it
do
justice.
that. We can do that. We can go into the.
I
Yeah.
I think we should. We've gotten to the place where by the late 60s, Dwayne Jones has kind of inverted all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And for it to be done through a director who, in the on and off switch of looking at culture, would be considered white because he's not black.
Yeah.
But we're talking about George Romero, you know?
Yeah. Cuban.
George
Cuban
Romero.
American. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so next time we're going to start seeing, what do you have in history and horror, which is black horror is black history, when black directors start to emerge beyond the son of Ingagi.
And we're going to be talking about Bill Gunn, Rusty Cundiff, Ernest Dickerson, and of course Jordan Peele. But there are a number of others. There are a handful of others that we can talk about and we can get into, and we can really dig into this world. So I'm glad that we're going to be cutting it up. So keep an eye out. Part 2 will drop the following week, hopefully. Just so you know, we're here. We're taking donations. If you enjoyed the show, come on, man. Dig into those pockets. Throw a little bit of cash our way, because we're busting our asses, and it'll be nice to be able to keep things going, make it a little easier. We appreciate you. So do your part, goddammit, because we're definitely doing ours.
It's either
buymeacoffee.com
that
slash watch Rick Ramos. It's either that or what?
or Rick starts his OnlyFans feet website.
Nobody wants that shit. God, nobody wants that.
So that's the alternative.
That's the alternative. Be good, folks, and keep watching out. We'll be here. Bye-bye now.